Tolerance is, I think, one of the most celebrated values of our time. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, we're told to be open-minded. We're told to accept others as they are, to create space for difference without judgment. And in many ways, I think that's good, right? Tolerance keeps our communities from fragmenting. It allows us to live side by side with people whose beliefs or backgrounds or choices are not necessarily our own. And it also prevents unnecessary conflict and also makes cooperation truly possible. But like every virtue we've covered in this series this month, I would also say tolerance has a shadow side as well. Tolerance, it can quietly drift into indifference, right? It can become less about respect and more about disengagement, right? So instead of truly wrestling with differences, we shrug at them. Instead of bringing conviction to the table, we hide it in the name of being open-minded. And what began as respect ends up as passivity. And that's the danger, when tolerance becomes a way of avoiding tension rather than actually engaging it, right? When we confuse open-mindedness with having no mind at all. When we stop standing for anything because we're really afraid of seeming intolerant. It's at that point that tolerance is no longer a virtue, it's become a vice. And it disconnects us from truth, from conviction, and even from intimacy. See, conviction is what gives relationships substance. Conviction is the courage to say, this is who I am, and this is what I believe. This is what matters to me. See, without conviction, tolerance is hollow. It allows us to coexist, but not to connect. Because intimacy does not grow in a space where no one takes a stand. Intimacy grows when people risk being known, when values are shared honestly, and when differences are navigated with both courage and compassion. Now, I've felt this tension in my life. Like there were times when I thought I was being respectful by keeping silence or by nodding along with ideas that I didn't really agree with. And I told myself that I was being tolerant. But the truth was, I was just being afraid. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be misunderstood. And so I disguised my fear as tolerance. But what that really created was disconnection. See, the people around me didn't know the real me. They knew the polite and agreeable version of me, but the version that had convictions they never met. And that's the paradox. You see, tolerance without conviction does not create peace. It creates distance. It keeps us from clashing, but it also keeps us from connecting. Because no one can connect deeply with a blank slate. They can only connect with someone who has edges or beliefs or commitments, someone who's willing to risk being known, right? Young men especially, I think, need to wrestle with this. We're often told that tolerance equals maturity, that conviction is rigid or narrow. But the truth is, maturity is about holding both of those. It's about respecting others while also respecting ourselves. It's about creating space for difference while we're still living from integrity. And that balance is, I think, what makes tolerance a virtue rather than a mask for indifference. See, the world doesn't need more people who passively accept everything. It needs men who know where they stand and still treat others with dignity. It needs people who can actually live with conviction and compassion side by side. That's the kind of tolerance, I think, that builds trust. That's the kind of tolerance that actually strengthens intimacy rather than eroding it. One of the subtle ways tolerance turns into indifference, I think, is through silence. It's where we convince ourselves that staying quiet is really the same as being respectful. And so we nod, we smile, we avoid the discomfort of disagreement. But silence doesn't always mean respect, does it? Silence actually, sometimes it means absence. It means that we've removed ourselves from the conversation rather than showing up with our truth. And when that happens, something important is lost in that process, because healthy tolerance, it doesn't erase our convictions. It actually creates space to bring them into dialogue. See, if tolerance means that we stop naming what we believe, then it's not tolerance anymore. It's self-erasure. And self-erasure is really the fastest way, I would say, to kill intimacy. You can't be fully known if you never speak up what you're really thinking. Indifference, it masquerades as maturity, but it actually starves connection. When we become so open-minded that nothing matters deep enough even to defend, people may see us as agreeable, but they'll never truly know us. Conviction is what reveals the contours of our souls. It's what gives shape to our relationships. Without conviction, every interaction becomes shallow, smooth on the surface, but underneath it's empty. This is where integrity matters. Integrity refuses to split who we are from what we're saying. It insists that if something matters to us, we name it, even when it's inconvenient. Integrity does not confuse, it doesn't confuse politeness with honesty. It knows that respect means telling the truth with love, not hiding truth out of fear. And for young men especially, this distinction is vital, I'd say. See, too many of us were taught to equate keeping the peace with being strong. But keeping the peace by erasing yourself is not strength. That's surrender. And the truth is, conviction is costly. People may not always agree with us. Some may even walk away. But without conviction, what's left is really a hollow tolerance that avoids conflict at the expense of intimacy. Because intimacy requires friction. It requires risk. It requires standing for something even when it would be easier to just stay quiet. I've noticed that the most transformative conversations in my life did not really come from polite agreement. No, they came from honest tension. They came when someone disagreed with me respectfully, or when I risked sharing a conviction that felt vulnerable. And it's in those moments that intimacy grew. Not in spite of the conviction, but because of it. That's the kind of tolerance I think that our world needs. A tolerance that doesn't really eliminate conviction, but actually elevates it. A tolerance that allows us to respect others while we're still standing in our own integrity. I think anything less becomes indifference. And indifference is just another name for disconnection. There's another way I think that tolerance loses its virtue, and that's when it's used as a shield against responsibility. See, if I'm claiming to tolerate everything, then I never have to risk taking a stand. I can actually avoid hard conversations. I can avoid saying no. I can avoid setting boundaries, all while I'm convincing myself that I'm just being open-minded. And that's not open-mindedness, that's passivity. And passivity is really a breeding ground for disconnection, right? The reality is, people long to know where we stand, even if they disagree. They find security in clarity, and they find conviction provides that form of clarity. When I know who you are and what you stand for, I then know how to engage with you. I know where the lines are. I know what matters to you. And without that kind of knowledge, every interaction will become slippery, right? It'll become uncertain and vague. And intimacy cannot grow in vagueness. Young men in particular, I think we need this reminder. See, the cultural script often tells us that being tolerant means that we're avoiding confrontation at all costs. But when we do that, we're not only losing conviction, we're also losing ourselves. We become a mirror of whoever we're with, right? Reflecting their beliefs back to them without ever really showing our own. And mirrors don't really build intimacy though. They just reflect. Integrity though, it requires far more. Integrity insists that we show up as ourselves, even if that risks conflict. It calls us to listen with respect, but also to speak with courage. And it refuses to let tolerance become this excuse for cowardice. Because at the end of the day, cowardice dressed up as tolerance is still cowardice. I've seen this in my own story, for example. There were moments when I convinced myself that going along with the crowd was really the same as being gracious. I told myself that I was avoiding unnecessary arguments. But in reality, I was just avoiding being known. And it was in those moments that the relationship that I thought I was preserving was actually being hollowed out by my silence. Now, here's the paradox to consider. Tolerance without conviction doesn't actually preserve the peace. It erodes it. Over time, resentment will build and frustration will grow, and the unspoken convictions will leak out in these passive aggression or even sudden explosions. See, by refusing to risk conflict in the moment, we're in essence guaranteeing that the conflict will come later. Now, integrity, by contrast, it chooses honesty now so that we can have intimacy that can thrive over time later. The kind of tolerance that leads to intimacy is rooted in truth. It's the kind of tolerance that says, I respect you even if I disagree with you. I'll listen to you, yes, even as I hold what I believe. And I'll create space for you without erasing myself in the process. That kind of tolerance strengthens the connection instead of weakening it. It builds bridges without dismantling our foundations. Now, this is what I think young men must really lean into if we're to live with both integrity and intimacy. It's not enough to just be agreeable. It's not enough to just nod along. We need to cultivate the kind of courage that stands for something while we're also treating others with dignity. That's what turns tolerance into a strength instead of a weakness. That's what keeps open-mindedness from slipping and sliding into indifference. See, tolerance without conviction is not love. It's not respect. It's not even maturity. It's absence. It's disengagement. And when we disengage in the name of tolerance, what we're losing is ourselves. We lose our voice. We lose our integrity. We lose the intimacy that only comes when people are honest enough to bring their full selves to the table, right? Real tolerance does not ask us to abandon conviction. It asks us to hold conviction with humility and to stand for what we believe without actually diminishing the dignity of those who we're disagreeing with. That kind of tolerance is not easy. It requires courage. It requires clarity. It requires compassion. But it's also the kind of tolerance that sustains intimacy. Because intimacy, like I said, requires truth. And truth cannot be present if conviction is absent. Indifference is easier. It costs less in the moment. But indifference leaves us hollow. It leaves us drifting, if you will, and unanchored and unsure of who we are. Conviction is harder. It asks us to risk misunderstanding and rejection and conflict. But conviction also grounds us. It gives us roots. It allows us to live with lives of integrity where what we believe is actually aligning with how we're living. And this is what I want for young men. I want us to live with the kind of strength that doesn't confuse tolerance with silence or open-mindedness with self-erasure. To live with the kind of courage to hold convictions while still treating others with honor. To be men who don't hide behind politeness, but who actually step forward with integrity. At Uber Vintagers, this is central to the mission that I have. I'm committed to calling men into a life where integrity and intimacy are not really competing values, but more so they're companions. Where tolerance is real, but so is truth. Where we create space for others without disappearing ourselves. That's the kind of manhood that transforms not just our relationships, but also our culture as well. And here's a glimpse of what's coming up ahead here. What we're touching on right now, this tension between tolerance and conviction, is really part of a larger framework that I'll soon be unfolding, and I call it the 764 movements. It's a way of seeing growth that doesn't settle for hollow virtues or counterfeit strengths. It's about alignment and presence and purpose, and the only way to get there is to start here, by refusing indifference and choosing conviction with integrity. See, tolerance or indifference is a choice. The choice that you choose will shape not only how others see us, but how deeply we are known. So let's be men who risk conviction. Let's be men who live with integrity. Let's be men who build intimacy, not by erasing ourselves, but by showing up fully with respect and with courage and with truth. I hope you'll join me there. Thanks for watching to this point in this video. Let me know in the comments how this episode landed for you. I will see you in the next episode.